Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour. And today is Monday, February 24th, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeanie Ryce on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Ryce's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet, and it's a tool I've been using for over 20 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again absolutely free. You can also download a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one where people have been stepped through that worksheet process. And if you choose to listen to them, even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefit from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. And we hope people do that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, we would appreciate you doing so. You can do that by sending me an email at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org, or you can email Jeanie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. And if we get a comment or a question, an answer or a testimonial from you, we will address it on the internet show, and then as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred, so you can listen back to the archives for your feedback or input. And we have the only other way to contact us would be if you are listening to the show at live.needle.com/mindshiftersradio. We're glad you're here, glad you're listening and sharing the conversation with us, and yet you can't type in a comment or speak to us directly unless you download the Needle app from your app store. That Needle, N-E-D-L, AI-assisted tuner for live radio. Once you download that app, open it, sign in, answer a few questions, it gives you the option to type in a comment or actually raise a hand. Hit the phone icon and speak to us live on the show. And we greatly appreciate whenever anybody does that, because it makes it infinitely easier for us to live into our intention with this work. And that intention to be of service is so much easier to do when we have direct input. The other thing that happens with that direct input is it dramatically increases the probability that whatever we're doing in the interactions on the show will end up being a highlight show. And so if there's a way for you to pipe up or type in, we'd appreciate it. It helps us in a number of ways. And we have plenty of time for comments or questions or suggestions. As I've mentioned in the past and like to mention on a regular basis, I'm open to suggestions about people that you think I should interview or books we should read, anything that's even remotely in line with this, the work that Dr. Michael Ryce has put out, or any of the books and teachers that I bring in that, from my perspective, are in alignment with this. It can be a podcast that you listen to on a regular basis. It can be a book that you've read that you found powerfully effective. It can be somebody that you've been to their seminar, and or a spiritual teacher that maybe you've seen on the circuit coming through your local church. And I will reach out to them and evaluate whether or not they would be a good fit for either the Mind Shifters radio, this hour that we have, 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, or the On Your Mind podcast, which is another project that I donate my time to, hosted by Journey's Dream, that is one of the things that they're trying to do is help rewrite the narrative on mental health in this country to one in which optimal health and well-being are possible and expected. And my contribution to that project is to host an internet show or a podcast that has been running about 5 years now, where we have interviewed people who have a holistic or functional medicine or integrative medicine approach to helping people with their challenges to mental health. And as that unfolds, the most challenging part of that for me is getting high quality people to agree to be interviewed. And so if you have a suggestion in that area, I would gladly welcome it and follow up as quickly as would be possible for me. We have a number of interviews coming up, a couple of them this week. I'm blessed to have people agree to be interviewed who have, one of them is a primary care physician who recognizes that he had many, many people come to him with mental health problems, and yet he was their only resource, and he had no training in mental health issues. So his life was quickly turned around as he figured out that if he didn't do something about it, it wouldn't get done. So he took extra training, and he's been starting an advocacy for changing the way our medical doctors are trained in this country so that they actually get as much kind of a training, or they have close to the same proficiency for dealing with mental health issues, the most common mental health issues, as they would have for dealing with a heart attack or a stroke or diabetes, etc. And he's absolutely concerned, or absolutely convinced, that the changing in the training is a distinct possibility, and it is the only thing that truly makes sense to him in terms of addressing this significant need. And then there'll be an interview I do with somebody who is a financial counseling specialist who specializes in helping families where they have a special needs child, because there's a lack of good information out there for parents if they have a child with special needs, aside from the fact that people are often told, oh, there's nothing going on here and your child is fine and you're overreacting. Apart from that often being false, the next thing is there's little, if any, good information out there about how those parents can prepare for the financial future of their child, especially when their child probably won't be making his or her own money to survive in the world. And the third interview that's coming up in a couple weeks is Carol Look. Carol was one of the first therapists to latch on to and really start to work seriously with EFT tapping when it came out years ago. And she's been a part of several books and movies on the subject, and she's a sought-after speaker internationally about EFT tapping, and she's agreed to be interviewed in a couple weeks. Then, of course, I mentioned last week that Christian Sundberg has agreed to be interviewed. And my take on that is that this show is the best place to bring Christian. So if we're lucky, if everything holds together, we'll do an hour talk with Christian Sundberg. I believe it's August 1st, but stay tuned. Details will be shared, especially if anything changes in that area. So how can we support you today? What's on your mind? How can we be of service? Either type a comment in the app or raise a hand to say hello. Let us know what would be of most benefit for you as we progress through the show today. And as usual, in lieu of anybody raising a hand or making a comment, I will return to reading from the book Of Course in Miracles by Alan Cohen. Subtitle is When Love Becomes a Way of Life. And where we left off, I had finished reading the lesson 17, but I hadn't read the miraculous insight questions that he has at the end of each chapter. And so thank you for your approval, clapping as it says, Julia. So miraculous insights from lesson 17. He questions, do you ever feel that you are alone? If so, how? And of course, this question comes up because in that lesson, he talked about how so many of these great, deep spiritual teachings tell us we're never alone. We're energetic entities. We're connected to everyone else. Things that we call weird coincidences or little miracles, what Jung would call synchronicities, happen on a regular basis. Blessings show up in our lives in the form of people, in the form of animals, in the form of a series of events that fall together in just the right way. And so he's calling us to question this. Do you ever feel alone? And if so, how is it that you feel alone? The second question is, how might you be accompanied by helpers who are caring for you and protecting you? And then he asks, who are the physical angels in your life? Most people have people that they're just really, really glad to have these people in their lives. And sometimes they're not even conscious of how much they appreciate having these people in their lives, or how valuable, I should say, how valuable these people are in their lives until after they're no longer present. Most of us have heard that, whether it's in a song or a poem, right? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. Well, there's, tremendous wisdom in that. The idea that we get so jaded, some people use the word jaded to represent, we get blind to something just because it's there all the time. We don't appreciate how valuable it is in our lives. So he's calling us to pay attention to who are the physical angels in your life, who are the people that are really, their very presence and your interactions with them in your life is a huge blessing. The next question is, who are the invisible angels, the ones that aren't so visible? Maybe they're helping you from the spiritual dimension. The next question is, do you constantly need another physical body person beside you? Or can you remain peaceful and whole when you are seemingly alone, when there seemingly is no one around physically? The next question is, where do you think people go when they die? And the last question is, how might your loved ones who have passed on remain with you? As soon as I read that, I think about the interview that was done between Wayne Dyer and Esther Hicks channeling Abraham. And for whatever reason, that interaction just jumped into my head, because Wayne Dyer was asking Abraham whether or not a certain interaction that he had was actually his mother showing up for him in an important way after she had already left the body. And Abraham's answer was, yes, absolutely, that your mother is always paying attention, and yet your mother is not as you remember her. She doesn't have all of the quirks and foibles of a human being. When she's dropped the body, she's this pure spirit consciousness. She's got a whole different level of wisdom and understanding, and I think here about how most of us, when we're infants, we have no idea how what our parents are doing for us is valuable to us, especially if it seems awkward or uncomfortable, or it's denying us some kind of food that we want. But they know from a higher level of wisdom that that wouldn't be good to give us a sharp object, shiny, maybe we want it, or a food that would be too sugary or too intense in flavor or whatever. Well, perhaps the same kind of thing happens if people exist outside the realm of the physical after they drop the body, and they're there and they have loving care for us, and yet they don't change everything we ask them to change. They don't help us in exactly the way we would ask them to help us, because what they're doing is better for us than what we would be asking for, because we simply can't know all the stuff we don't know, and how it might be better for us to struggle with something, in our words, to struggle with something, rather than to have them make it go away. So then he asks us to affirm the following 4 points. The first one is, I do not walk alone. Next, I am blessed with endless support in both the physical and non-physical dimensions. Next, everyone I have ever loved remains with me. And finally, I affirm that love never dies. And I get it. I have, lots of years of experience trying to work with people through grief. And this morning I was listening to a podcast from the Radically Genuine podcast with Dr. Roger McFillin. And he was interviewing a woman who has become an advocate for, we'll call it informed consent, and a radical revision of the way antidepressant medications are prescribed and how little supervision there is for the people who've been given those medications, because her husband, who was sensitive to medications, was prescribed the medication and then basically lost touch with reality and ended his life. And ever since then, she's been advocating for 20 years or more now, I think. And part of her story, when she was telling her story, was right after her husband died, she went to her doctor, and the doctor asked her if she was, in pain or sad. And she said, yeah, I've got this heartache. My heart literally aches from the loss of my husband. And the doctor said, do you want something for that? And she said, what do you mean? Isn't it normal to feel pain when someone you love dies? And the doctor says, yes, but you don't have to feel that. Meaning, we'll give you drugs to numb you out from your feelings, from your emotions. And, this is a big part of what she's advocating for and Roger McFillin are advocating for, to let us go back to understanding that having strong emotional energies move through our lives is part of this life. It's normal, and it's not appropriate to always just numb it out. So there's a balance that we can talk about, and everybody can find their own balance between having grief, and experts can do research and study about, what's an appropriate time to grieve a loved one and what would the symptoms be, etc. And we have, on the one hand, people who lose a loved one and barely cry, and they rationalize it away, and they move on, and maybe quickly remarry or quickly have another child or whatever. And on the other hand, we have people who never really get their life back on track after a loss. And it might be 30 or 40 or 50 years later. I remember one time I was asked to give a presentation at the senior center in the town where I live and work, because it was around the holidays and holiday stress. And as I was doing that, I was talking about some of the tools that we talk about here on Mind Shifters Radio, and that Dr. Michael and Jeanie Ryce make available on their website. And I was talking about how if you've lost a loved one 2 or 3 or 5 or 8 years ago, and you're still having a hard time around the holidays because they died near the holidays or about the anniversary of their death, you have a very rough time, we have these tools that might help you dismantle the upset you're generating. And there was a woman there who got just vehemently angry at me and said that, she would not want to stop grieving for her son, who I believe had died 30-some years prior. And this woman was clearly miserable because he died near the holidays, and here we were talking about the holidays, and she was ready to fight me. At least verbally she was already fighting, and maybe even physically, to try and hold on to her grief. And that would be at what I would call at one extreme. And then at the other extreme, we have, medical doctors that offer people meds so that a week or two after their husband or wife or child dies, they don't have to feel anything. And neither one of them is as productive as they could be. if you reach a balance, if you reach a flexibility with an understanding of how you're generating the emotion of grief and every emotion that you experience, and that's what we're here to talk about and assist people in doing with these tools. So I'm just triggered to think about this in terms of these last affirmations, that some people think the only way they can maintain a connection to the one that they loved who's no longer with them is to remain grief-stricken and in pain. And I would offer that there are alternatives to that, that you can stay very deeply connected and that you can maintain awareness of and access to the multitude of life lessons that you've accumulated through the course of your relationship with a person without needing to generate intense pain and ongoing grief that lasts for years. And one of the ways to do that is to become aware of some of the conversation that Alan Cohen was having in his last chapter of this book. The 18th chapter is titled Beautiful Dreamer. And the text reads, people who criticize you are making up stories in their mind about you. Usually the story is more about the critic than the recipient. Now, I will tell you that I can agree with that last sentence if we take out the word usually. You don't even have to put in the word always, but you could say the story is more about the critic than the recipient. The way I say it is, whatever comes out of my mouth is always going to tell you more about what's going on inside of me, because it can't come out of me unless it's already in me. It's always going to tell you more about what's going on inside me than anybody or anything around me. So he says, the story usually is more about the critic than the recipient. Those who criticize you caustically don't know how to deal with their own feelings of inadequacy, so they attempt to relieve their distress by dumping their judgments on you. You can't afford to take angry criticism personally. It's not about you. He writes, I attended a spiritual conference where a lecturer presented slides illustrating her lesson. One of the slides showed a drawing of a slot machine. As the lecturer went on to her next slide, a woman in the audience stood and shouted, quote, that proves it. You are an agent of the Antichrist. Your last slide displayed 666, the mark of the beast. Close quotes. Now the lecturer was taken aback, so she backed up the slide again, which depicted a slot machine with 3 cherries in its windows. It took a huge stretch of the imagination to interpret those cherries as 666. But the woman who objected did exactly that. Her mind didn't show her a picture of 3 cherries. It showed her 3 sixes. It was obvious to everyone else in the audience that the intention was to present cherries, not numbers. And they laughed at the suggestion. Here we have a very literal demonstration that the world is nothing more than a blank screen upon which we project our thoughts. A Course in Miracles proclaims, quote, there is no world. This is the central thought the Course attempts to teach, close quotes. And that's from the workbook 132, probably paragraph 6, lines 2 through 3. Now, every time I hear this, and I'm reading it in a book or I hear it in a discussion, I would like to clarify that you can go down a rabbit hole here and get in and find all kinds of people who want to argue with you about whether or not there is a real world or there's anything out here or there's no real world. And if you have those kinds of stuck points, maybe you're comfortable with your belief in it, I would just offer Dr. Michael Ryce has a lecture series, or a lecture, and probably whole snippets of YouTube videos around the title, What is the World? And he is very articulate as he tries to explain that as he reads the Course in Miracles, the Course in Miracles is talking about, it uses the same word, world, W-O-R-L-D, and in different contexts, Dr. Ryce firmly believes that at one point, the text of the Course in Miracles is trying to get us to understand that there is a world that the Creator created for us. We are actually here, we're having a physical experience, etc. And on the other hand, whatever we interpret, and anytime we make a judgment or we create a perception at any level, it's not the same as the actuality. So Michael uses the word reality for the interpretation I make, the judgments I make, the perceptions I create, and the word actuality to represent the world that the Creator created. So here, Course in Miracles proclaims, quote, there is no world. This is the central thought the Course attempts to teach, close quotes. Michael Ryce would help you clarify that by saying, the Course proclaims there is no world just the way it shows up in your mind, the way you've been trained to interpret and judge things, the way you've been trained to perceive things, the way your hopes and fears distort your perception. There's another line in the Course in Miracles that says we must learn to understand how deeply we get things distorted by the way we want things to be. Our perception is distorted by the way we want things to be. Alan here goes on and says, if the world is a dream, then we are the dreamer. Nighttime dreams are unsubstantial because when we awaken, everything in the dream, pleasant or nightmare, dissolves. All of the characters that populated the dream, those who seem to be discrete entities separate from ourself, they fade in the morning light. They were but figments of our imagination. What they seemed to be doing for or against us, we were doing really for or against ourselves. They were not the cause of our experience. They represented our subconscious thoughts rising to the surface of our awareness so we can learn from them and, where necessary, heal them. The next quote he shares from the Course in Miracles, we've shared a number of times before, quote, there is no order of difficulty in miracles. That's from the text 1 point whatever. He writes, because there is no order of reality in illusions, we make up a story that one disease is harder to heal than another, or that one childhood ordeal is especially difficult to overcome. And yet, they are equally unreal dream diseases and dream ordeals. None of them have any power over us, meaning our true spiritual self, our core self. He writes, the only real power is in our mind. Then Alan writes, events are neutral, which echoes the title of a lesson from the Way of Mastery, all events are neutral. I believe it's lesson 9. Alan writes, events are neutral. It is what we make of them that determines our experience. And then he quotes the workbook from Course in Miracles, the second lesson, that says, I have given everything I see all the meaning that it has for me, close quotes. Alan writes, You can tell what is in your mind by what you are seeing on the screen of the world. If you are fixated on the Antichrist, you will find the Antichrist everywhere. If you are concentrating on the Christ, you will find the Christ wherever you look. The entire world is a huge ink blot. Now, earlier we talked about this little exercise, this little video you can find where they're giving a live demonstration of what is called the reticular activating system. It's a part of your mind that responds to show you what you say you want to see. So if you buy a red Ford Bronco, you're going to be driving around and you're going to see more red cars than you've ever seen before. And you're going to see more Broncos of various colors than you've ever seen before. And you're going to think, oh my gosh, somebody has been spying on me and broadcasting to the community I live in so that other people go out and buy cars just like the one I bought. The fact of the matter is, there aren't any more or less cars there that are red or that are the model of the car that you bought than there were before. It's just that you're now focusing on them. Your mind is seeing them because it's risen to a level of importance in your mind. The last line I read here from Alan Cohen is, the entire world is a huge inkblot test. So what's an inkblot test? It's one of the more widely known psychological projection tests. What they did was, they did the best they could to take a piece of paper and fold it in half and put some ink in it and smash it together and then just pull it apart. And whatever the design was created, they left it there, and then they printed them out. And they gave a standard set of these pictures that's just mostly black and white. A few of them had some red or orange ink in them. And then they used it as a diagnostic device, and they would hold up these pictures in front of hundreds of people and say, what might this be? And that's all they were allowed to say, the simple phrase, what might this be? Just that way, same kind of pacing, same kind of intonation, no change in the words. The idea was they were trying to create a scientific set of circumstances so they could start to judge, without a lot of interfering factors, what's going on in the mind of the person that we show the picture to. So one of the pictures routinely gets answers like two bears balancing a ball. But every once in a while, somebody will respond to that, two bears fighting to the death. Or a big man riding a Harley motorcycle down the road. Or, for people who are even more emotionally disturbed, that's a woman's body parts right after she was raped, etc., etc. Now, they're all looking at the same external stimuli, but they're not seeing the same thing. Alan Cohen goes on and writes, A Course in Miracles underscores the futility of trying to fix the world. We may be tempted to manipulate people or situations so they will conform to our desires and expectations. Yet, if you've ever tried to fix your husband or wife, you know how frustrating and fruitless that is. Alan writes, I coached a woman who had just been released from the hospital after being treated for dangerously high blood pressure. The medication she was taking at home wasn't working. Alan says, I asked her, quote, is there some situation in your life by which you are feeling extremely pressured, or you are exerting extreme pressure? Close quotes. And she responded, I feel frustrated trying to fix my husband. Alan asked, how long have you been trying to fix him? She responded, 42 years. Alan asked, "If you haven't fixed your husband in the past 42 years, do you think there will be any more successful or any more success for you in the next 42 years?" "No," she admitted. "I'm starting to see that now." Then he quotes the textbook from the Course in Miracles, where it says, quote, "Therefore seek not to change the world, but choose to change your mind about the world." Close quotes. And then Alan writes, Ramana Maharshi said, quote, "A dreamer dreams that all the characters in his dream must awaken before he can." Close quotes. The dream characters do not need to awaken because they have no reality or volition of their own. They are the projections of the dreamer, not a condition for the dreamer's awakening. When the dreamer awakens, all the characters and events in the dream disappear. You cannot fix the world because it is not broken. In this sense, that world has no reality. Instead, we must heal our thoughts of brokenness. Then he quotes the textbook. It might be lesson 21 or chapter, paragraph 21. The perception is a result and not a cause. Close quotes. Perception is a result and not a cause. Helen writes, "I once led a week-long retreat in Portland, Oregon. One afternoon, our group took a boat trip on the beautiful Willamette River. In preparation for the trip, in a small open craft, I took my backpack with a bottle of water, and I spread some sunscreen on my face and arms. Just before the boat left the dock, I dipped my finger in the river to check its temperature. When I pulled my finger out of the water, I noticed it was covered with a thin film of oil. Immediately, I grew irritated that this pristine river had become polluted from the from the motorboats that used it. And then he tried to soothe himself. Well, maybe the oil is just from the boats at the dock. A few minutes downstream, I poked my finger in the river again. To my dismay, the river still had an oil slick. Now I was really getting irked. I was thinking to myself, this is one of the last pure rivers in America, and it's contaminated. I decided to try to be patient and wait until we were further downstream. When we finally reached a remote portion of the river, I tested the water again. Tragically, the water was still polluted. My afternoon of delight had morphed into a depressing discovery. Then I reached into my backpack to retrieve my water bottle, and I noticed my tube of sunscreen. Suddenly it dawned on me. The oil was on my finger, not the river. Because my finger was oily, whatever my finger touched seemed oily. The river was pure. My finger was polluted. A polluted, sick, or evil world is the projection of a polluted, sick, or evil thought. At first, it may be distressing to realize that you are living in a dark story that you made up. Yet, this insight paves the way to freedom. If you authored an oppressive story, you have the power to author a liberating story. So, if you don't like the plot, you can rewrite it. The best stories arc from a sinister plot to a rewarding conclusion. John Lennon said, quote, "Everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end." Close quotes. Then he quotes Course in Miracles, Workbook 31, where it says, quote, "I am not the victim of the world I see." Alan writes, a traveler in olden times came to the village at the edge of a city where he found a gatekeeper. He asked the gatekeeper, "What's it like to live in this city?" The gatekeeper returned with the comment or the question, "What was it like where you came from?" The man said, "It was an awful place, crowded, crime, polluted, and lots of selfish people." And the gatekeeper shrugged his shoulders and said, "Well, that's pretty much what you'll find here." The visitor shook his head and continued on his way. An hour later, another traveler approached the city gate. He asked the gatekeeper, "What's it like in this city?" The gatekeeper asked, "What was it like where you lived?" The person replied, "A pretty nice place. Good people, safe, clean, easy to get around." The gatekeeper replied, "Well, that's pretty much what you'll find here." That visitor smiled and entered the city. Alan writes, "We keep finding the same results because we take our mind wherever we go. The one thing that all your problems have in common is your mind." Now, the next, I'm telling you, I'm reading verbatim from Alan Cohen's book. The next line says, "Dr. Michael Ryce wrote a book entitled, 'Why is this happening to me again?' He gives the example, quote, you fly away from New York to get away from a bad relationship, and the person who meets you at the airport in Los Angeles completes the sentence that the person in New York began," close quotes. So here we have Alan Cohen quoting Dr. Michael Ryce from his book, "Why is this happening to me again?" Then Alan writes, "The law of attraction continually draws to us people who play out our patterns of thinking. But that's not a bad thing. We keep facing the outpicturing of our hidden fear-based thoughts so we can heal them and get free." Michael Ryce wouldn't say it's the law of attraction. Michael Ryce would say it's the law of resonance that facilitates this happening, whether we like it or not. So we've got about, maybe 10 minutes left. And I'm interested to find out if anyone is hearing me, how the sound quality is, and if there's a response to hearing that in the middle of Alan Cohen's book, he's quoting Dr. Michael Ryce from his book, "Why is this happening to me again?" And I should say, because I've been reading nonstop for a while, we welcome people to drop in a comment or tap the phone icon on the app, or send us an email, even if I seem to be in the middle of reading something or in what some would call a monologue. Thank you, Julia, for saying sound is perfect and the book is awesome. So, for anybody who might be interested, that quote where Alan Cohen quotes Dr. Michael Ryce and his book, "Why is this happening to me again?" is on page 169. At least on the Kindle version of the book Of Course in Miracles, subtitled "When Love Becomes a Way of Life." So, Alan ended that paragraph by saying that we keep facing an outpicturing of our hidden fear-based thoughts, not as a punishment, but so that we can heal them and get free. He goes on and writes, "A geographical or horizontal cure attempts to create a solution by manipulating logistics. A spiritual or a vertical cure pierces to the causative level of mind. One is the storyline, the other is the glory line. The storyline is played out in human drama. The glory line is the higher purpose of any experience that generates soul awakening. Most people attempt to improve the storyline without addressing the glory line. Only inner transformation will take us where we need to go." And now as soon as I hear that, I'm reading a need to go, I hear a story echoing and wanting to be told from one of Guy Finley's stories. He talks about a little, some kind of a flower with a name Button in it, a little daisy button. And the little daisy button was sitting next to a dandelion. And you know, dandelions, they bloom yellow and then they turn white, and the seeds, at a little gust of wind, they go flying in all directions. And the little dandy button was nervous. And the dandelion said, "Why are you so nervous?" And the dandy button said, "Well, it's not for me, it's for you. Don't you know what's going to happen soon?" And the dandelion said, "Why? What are you talking about?" And the dandy button says, "Well, you know, pretty soon a wind is going to come along and your seeds are going to get scattered all over the place. Doesn't that make you nervous?" And the dandelion says, "No, because every gust of wind takes me exactly where I need to be." Exactly where I need to be. Every event in life can be interpreted by me as happening for me rather than to me. Everything that I experience, I can choose to use, as Alan Cohen would say, as part of the glory line. I can use it to raise my consciousness. I can use it, as Guy Finley would say, as a lesson riding in on the back of the events that I don't want, but it's a lesson that I need to learn to be happy, to move forward. Every gust of wind takes me exactly where I need to be. Only inner transformation will take us where we need to go. Alan continues. He writes, in an early Star Trek television episode, Captain Christopher Pike and a small crew visit a planet populated by mentally powerful beings. These aliens capture Pike and his crew, and they exert a hypnotic effect on them, so that the crew believes they're in jail. After a while, Pike figures out that they're not really in jail, but they've fallen prey to the power of suggestion. When the jailer brings the prisoners their meal, Pike wrestles them to the ground and begins to choke him. "You stop this illusion or I'll twist your head off," Pike yells. And when he's intimidated, the alien releases the spell, and the crew finds itself free in an open field. Alan writes, the fall of Adam, in the story of the Garden of Eden, was the hypnosis into which we all entered when we dropped into the consciousness of the three-dimensional world and we began to identify ourselves as only physical bodies. We believed that we were separate from God, and we believed that there is a world outside of us that generates our experience. It's a belief, not the truth. It's a belief. Alan writes, A Course in Miracles urges us to break free of the belief that anyone or anything outside ourselves causes our life. Renowned seer and psychic and medium Edgar Cayce repeatedly stated, quote, "Mind is the builder," close quotes. Mind is the builder. Alan writes, the world seems to be beset with many daunting troubles. Disease is rampant, the economy is volatile, and wars go on seemingly endlessly. The situations seem unique, and yet the story is nothing new. It's an old dream with the same characters in different costumes repeating the same lines. New wine in old wineskins that keep breaking. In the world, quote, it's always something, close quotes. In spirit, quote, it's never anything, close quotes. No illusion has any more substance than any other illusion. Allen writes, Jesus overcame the world by establishing himself in the glory line rather than staying stuck in the story line. You and I are called to achieve the same exalted state of mind. The Antichrist has no power over someone whose vision is founded in the Christ. The Antichrist is invisible to those who focus on the Christ. Trying to purge the world of evil is as futile as the woman in that seminar audience yelling at the presenter who she thought displayed 666, when in reality it was a picture of 6 cherries. Instead, we must purge our mind of its fearful thoughts. Then he quotes Course in Miracles, where it says, miracles are everyone's right, and yet purification is necessary first, close quotes. It is purification of our thoughts that the Course is referring to here. The old film titled Mighty Joe Young tells of a huge King Kong-like ape who is captured and wreaks havoc in a city. Then a pure-hearted woman quells his rampage by whistling the song, quote, Beautiful Dreamer, close quotes. A Course in Miracles is whistling to us amidst a rampage of fear in the city of illusion. The Course in Miracles reminds us that we are all beautiful dreamers, using the mind of God that has given us this ability to create the story of our lives. The slide that seemed to show a threat to Christ is simply an innocent cartoon. We can toss aside any judgments and recognize any attack on us, including our own, as the result of an illusion and a delusion. Then we can get on to the next slideshow, or the next slide in the show, and we can be unfettered by the projections of a fearful mind. Then he quotes from the workbook, lesson 41, quote, you can indeed afford to laugh at fear thoughts, remembering that God goes with you wherever you go. So, thank you all for listening. I will wrap up that for our reading for the show today. I'll remind you that as this show ends, soon after, Michael and Jeanie Ryce will probably, since I haven't heard differently, start up a second hour. And he'll close down the app and open it again for Michael and Jeanie. And I appreciate you being here and listening. And I will remind us all that we come from love. We're made of the stuff that we call love. We actually are love. And everything else is false. Blessings.